they're sort of the Deadpool class. Like, they uniquely understand that they're in a role-playing game and have abilities that kind of let them break the game at times, because they can, like, rewrite the narrative that you're in.
Welcome to the Character Sheet, your home for everything tabletop and fantasy news. I'm producer Pete, and I have a very special guest here today. He's been on the channel many times. You've probably known him from his long career of making amazing RPGs. It's MCDM's own James Introcaso, here to talk a little bit about some big developments in Draw Steel. James, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I am always excited to come back on the Character Sheet, and I get to talk to you, Pete, which is one of my favorite people to talk to. So this is very exciting for me that I get to talk about my favorite thing with one of my favorite folks.
We love to hear it. And we know that there's a new Patreon playtest packet that came out recently. And one of the big things that changed was there are some new classes now in Draw Steel. So why don't we talk very briefly? Let's get like a kind of an overview of the classes before we deep dive on them individually. So what are these new classes?
Yeah, so there's 9 classes in Draw Steel, right? And we had shown off 5 previously. So we had shown off the Conduit, who is a servant of a deity, a spellcaster, right? Bursting with divine grace and wrath, right? And then we had the Elementalist, who is a arcane spellcaster, right? Creating balls of fire and all kinds of elemental power shooting out, right? Including elements like the void and the green, right? And then we've also got the Tactician, who is a warrior who's great at helping their friends move them around, kind of like a 4E warlord and fighter mixed together. We had the Shadow, right? Who is our sneaky, stealthy, assassin-y class. And then we had the Fury, who is our get angry and hit things really hard class. So we have introduced 4 new classes, right? And those classes are the Censor. The Censor is kind of a counterpart to the Conduit. The Censor is a holy warrior, but if the Conduit is the spellcaster version, the Censor is the bladed melee fighter version, right? Who goes out there and is hitting people with divine energy. They're sort of a hunter, right? Like they pick targets, they hunt them down, and their lore, right, is that all churches in this world have censors, and censors are the people that it's like, hey, there's a monster that is specific to our interests that needs to be slain. Please go slay that monster, right? Whereas the Conduit is more of a generalist priest, right? Some conduits might fight monsters, but others might be out there helping the community in different ways, right? The Censor is strictly, I'm gonna mess some people up. Then we've also got the next class would be the Null, right? And the Null is a psionic warrior who is unarmed. And a lot of what they do is dampen the effects of spellcasters and other psionic users who are enemies of theirs, right? So they can get in there and they can grapple people and they can dampen their powers. They have an aura that makes the abilities of people in that aura become weaker, right? So they are easier for your allies to resist and that kind of thing. And you're also extremely mobile. So you're running all over the field, punching, kicking, grabbing people, throwing them around, right? That's sort of the fantasy of the Null. It is not, right, like the Null is meant to be an unarmed warrior, but they are not like distinctly East Asian flavored, right?
Gotcha.
They are more their own thing, right? They are meant to be more like a superhero who kind of like shuts things down and shows up like Superman doesn't need a sword, and so it's that sort of vibe. I mean, they're not Superman, right? Like they're of equivalent power to everything else we're talking about, but that's kind of the vibe that they give off. And then we also have the Talent. The Talent is we have a 5e version of the Talent. They're our version of a Scion, right? They're a psionic person. They move things with their mind. They can manipulate the flow of time as well. They can manipulate emotions, right? They're telepaths, they're telekinetics, they're chronokinetics, right? That's sort of their big thing that they can do. And then we have the Troubadour. And the Troubadour is a swashbuckling storyteller who has the power to aid their allies through song and performance, but they're sort of the Deadpool class. Like, they uniquely understand that they're in a role-playing game and have abilities that kind of let them break the game at times, because they can like rewrite the narrative that you're in. So that's some of the fun of the Troubadour too. Yeah. It's tongue in cheek, right? And they do it through magic, right? It's not flavored as like they turn to the camera and talk to it necessarily. But they have these magic abilities that sort of hint at the fact that like all the world's a stage and we're players in it. And that is actually true for us. And therefore I can rewrite the play that we are in right now and change things to make them better for us.
Well, that's awesome. We'll deep dive on a little bit of these classes. Now, I played a version of the Troubadour in one of our last videos, but we were only doing the social aspect of it all.
Yes.
So this is very interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about what separates the Troubadour from your normal, like, quote unquote, like bard class. Like, it sounds like there's some fourth wall breaks. It sounds like they're much more in like if you had to pick like a Pathfinder or D&D sub, like the Scald archetype of a bard, where it's, they're not necessarily just there to buff. They're there to, the sword fight. They're there to do some damage. So what exactly, let's just deep dive a little more about what makes this Troubadour so unique, because it sounds like a pretty amazing class.
Yeah, and so I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? Like, a big part of what makes them different is they can get in there and mix it up. Now, Draw Steel is a little unique not unique, right? There's lots of games that do this, but it's different from D&D in the sense that like there are a lot of choices that you make as you build and level up your character, and those things are going to determine the sort of Troubadour you create, right? So you can, and there's 3 different subclasses of Troubadour, right? We call them your class act in the Troubadour. And your class act can be Scald, right? One of them is called Scald. And that is you're the storyteller, and you want to recount those stories. You're using magic. They're one of probably the most Deadpool-y of them all, right? They're using a lot of magic to like recount things, but they're also getting in there and they're mixing it up. There's a duelist subclass, which is like you really, really want to focus on the sword fighting aspect of this, and you want to get in there and be swashbuckling and daring, right? Like feats of daring do, swinging around, whipping your sword, and you inspire your allies, right, with your sword play and stuff like that. And then there's the virtuoso, and the virtuoso leans probably a little bit more traditional bard, right? They have a lot of songs that they're singing that inspire their allies and that sort of thing. But you can mix and match abilities from a lot of these different things, right? You could take some sword play, you take some reformatting the story, some songs, right, and create the image that you want to create. And that's the thing that I think is really fun. The other thing that they do is we've talked about this a little bit before, or probably ad nauseum on this show, actually, about heroic resources, right? So their heroic resource is drama. Right. And they generate drama in all these different kinds of ways. So like they get drama the first time that 3 or more heroes use an ability on the same turn, which can happen, right, with triggered actions and stuff like that. They get drama the first time a hero becomes winded. They get drama whenever somebody crits. They get drama when a hero, including them, dies. And they can actually, if they die, if during that battle they continue to accumulate drama, right? Like they uniquely continue to accumulate stuff even though they're dead, they can spring up back to life if they accumulate enough drama, because it's like, haha, I wasn't actually dead, right? Like it was yeah, exactly. So that's the kinds of things that like that they do, and they can do that sort of thing with drama. They can fake their death. They can say like, oh no, you don't hit me, you hit your friend, right? Like when you attack me. They can duel you and slide you into different positions as they come forth and stuff like that. So yeah, it is a very active and a very physical class, more so than we would think of a 5e bard as.
Well, that's amazing. And that leads us, let's dive into the talent now, because as you said, like the talent was very famously one of your big like 5e supplement classes. It came out a little while ago. So what's changed in the talent now that the talent is fully in Draw Steel? Like what like tweaks have been made to the talent, or what stands out now that he's a fully Draw Steel creature?
Yeah, so one of the big things we had to figure out with the talent, and props, Willie Abiel did the design both on the Troubadour and the talent that we're about to talk about. And the big thing about the talent that made it like, whoa, this is going to be hard in Draw Steel is that the talent fits D&D's sort of game of attrition style, right? Where it's like, hey, you're taking on strain as the day goes on, and then when you rest, you get rid of your strain, and strain gives you penalties. And we tried a couple versions like that. It just didn't mesh as well with the rest of the Draw Steel classes because they're all about building up their resources, right? So we said, okay, but people love the strain aspect. They like that their talent gets a bloody nose and that it affects them. What can we do, right? And the proposal that Willie came up with was, hey, so you have this resource, right? And it's called clarity, and you build clarity. But the talent uniquely can go into clarity debt. You can overspend, right? You can get that classic withdraw from your bank overdraft fee.
Yes.
And the overdraft fee is strain. So while you're in debt, right? Like you need to earn back clarity to get out of debt. You are strained. So now it's more like a condition. And there's certain things that happen when you're strained. You take damage when you do different things. But you also, when you use your abilities, if you are strained, different things happen. And it's usually a double-edged sword. It's like, hey, this ability is going to deal more damage when you use it, but now it can also target your allies, right? Or this ability is going to push back your enemy further, but it also pushes you back when you use it, right? Like that kind of thing. That's probably one of the big fun features now is that like you might try to get into clarity debt to be like, I really want to be strained because I really want to push you back further, and I don't care if I get knocked back more, right? So there's a little bit of strategy there to those kinds of things. That's probably the biggest change that we're seeing from the talent from 5e to Draw Steel.
Awesome. Then let's jump into the other new psionic class, the Null. And then it sounds like the Null is sort of not only an offensive and a controlling class, but like a debuffing class. So what differentiates the Null from the talent, and like what really what makes the Null such a unique class? You don't really see a lot of debuffing classes in RPG, which is great because I love playing them whenever I can. Like in MMOs, I always love playing me like the status affliction class. Is that kind of what the Null is?
Yeah, so the Null, right? And shout out to our designer Robert DeJordovich. He did the Null and the Censor, which is the other class we're going to talk about. Did a great job. And so the Null has been a tough nut to crack, right? Because I think first people think monk, right? Like when they see an unarmed warrior. And then they also, I think so that's the expectation. We were like, well, it's not that, right? Maybe we will make a martial arts class in the future, right? And if we do, we're going to work with the right people to do that, right? I don't want to, none of us are qualified to do that, right?
Yes.
None of us are experts in that culture, and none of us are from that culture. But we do have this idea for like a cool kind of superhero class, right? And so, okay, we need to sell that fiction. We need to make all of that work, and we need to make debuffing fun. Right. We need to make it fun for the director, too, because if you're going to have someone who is a debuffer the whole time, that could be annoying if it's just counterspell, counterspell, counterspell. Right.
Yeah.
And so what makes them different from the talent, right, is that the talent is all about using psionics to manipulate their environment. Right. And their enemies. The Null is all about using psionics to manipulate themselves, right, and debuff their enemies. So, like, we have there's a couple of different subclasses. One of them is the cryokinetic, right? We have a pyrokinetic talent, right, who's like carry, lighten up things on fire with their mind. The cryokinetic, right, is the hey, now I become Iceman, right? And I can punch you, and it slows you down when I hit you with my cold fist, right? And I can slide around on ice luges and stuff like that. And so the big thing that we need to look at was like, how can we make it so that this debuffing is worth it and it matters? And at first there were a bunch of things where we were like, you know what it should be? It should be like when you're near your allies, right? You have this aura so that it's not all over the field. It's just near you. And then you have to tactically position yourself to use it, right? Hit that tactical thing. And if you're near your allies, you're dampening their power, right? Like not their power, you're dampening the power of the enemies trying to affect them. And what happened was people who played the Null were like, this feels antithetical because I want to go punch my enemy to slow them with my cold fist. But then I want to be back there protecting my squishy allies, and I can't do both. And so we sat down and we're like, okay, let's reverse it. If you are in the field and you're an enemy, you're affected by it. It's not your targets. It's you got to be close to that enemy to sort of bring down their stuff. And what it does is you know, it's a class that is based on like that discipline is their resource that they build, right? So it's like there's a couple things that you do to people automatically when they're in your aura, but then you can spend discipline to change what your aura does, right? And say like, well, now my aura does the normal thing plus this, right? Or now it does this. And then you have other things that you can do where it's like, I can draw people into my aura. Now I can make my aura bigger for a turn, or I can, you know, punch somebody. And because you are in my aura, when I punch you, you go further, right? Like when I knock you back and that kind of thing. So that's their big thing for the Null. Yeah.
Well, that sounds. Now I'm in a dilemma because I was almost certainly going to play a tactician first, but this sounds like this is right up my alley. The only thing that's even remotely close to this I can think of is the old Starfinder Vanguard class with their kinetic entropy stuff, but that was all internal.
Yes.
That was all you hit me and things happen to me. This is very much I take that I do things to you and things happen to you. I like that a lot. And now I have a quandary.
It's external, right? It's the power comes from within me, and then I am gonna punch it all over you. Yeah,
that's amazing. But then maybe I'll play our last. Maybe I'll play the Censor because the Censor sounds interesting. It sounds like it's a very unique combination. It sounds like a little paladin. It's got a little Pathfinder witch hunter or a magus. Like it's got a lot of stuff going for it. So like, let's talk a little bit more about the Censor and how it sort of fits in the grand scale of Draw Steel here.
Yeah, so the Censor really is. We have a 5e class called the Ill Rigger, which is
available now on D&D Beyond.
Yeah, thank you for your coverage about it being released on D&D Beyond. And so the idea of the Ill Rigger, right, is that in 5e you have a certain number of seals that you get each day, and you can place seals on enemies to deal extra damage, curse them, move them around, right? And we thought, well, what is the more heroic version of that, right? Well, the idea that like, okay, you work for the church and you're not placing seals on people, you're placing judgments, right? And so you come in, you place a judgment on somebody, and when you do that, it is a little bit of a debuff thing again, right? As well. Essentially, you can then say, right? We picture them as the go out and find people. They might arrest somebody for the church, right? That kind of thing. And so they have these abilities that like make it so like, hey, you can do what you were gonna do, but you're gonna take damage now, right? Like you can attack my friends, but I get to deal damage to you for free, right? That's sort of the main thing. But then depending on the subclass, right? When you place a judgment, you might teleport right next to them after you do that, right? You might be able to bring them to you instead, right? Like Darth Vader style, slide them your way and bring them close. You might be able to then make it so that like, hey, when an ally hits this person, they get to heal, right? Because this divine seal is upon them. And I am like outlining them in holy light and saying like, we are going to go after this person, right? Like it's not like it's different than the tactician, right? The tactician says we, the Censor says I am going to go after this person. So a lot of it is they say like me and you, right? They might pick somebody on the battlefield, go after them, and they seal them, and it's like, okay, now we are in combat together. I'm gonna, keep putting my judgments on you to mess you up and everything like that. And then once you're down, I'll move my judgment to the next person, and so on and so forth, right? I picture them kind of almost as I think Censors are pretty sinister, right?
I was saying they give me big sort of early grimdark, like Age of Sigmar or Space Marine vibe, where they're sort of like a Black Templar, if you will, where they're kind of there to they're there. It's almost like they're handing out punishment. It's like, this is the price you pay for the thing you do, and I am the person that makes you pay the price.
Exactly, right? And I think there is, for very good reason, right? A lot of people don't necessarily trust law enforcement authority at the moment. And we were like, look, the Censor, part of the fantasy of the Censor can be, right? Because it's a fantasy world, right? Like there are good law enforcement people out there, right? and I want to play that person. I want to play the knight in shining armor, the paladin, right? You can do that with a censor, but there are also more sinister people. There's the Punisher is out there, right? Who's not really law enforcement, but fancies himself kind of, right? As the sole authority, right? And stuff like that. So like, there's also this, like, you pick your god, right, when you are a censor and you are of that church, and so you get certain abilities too based on the god that you select. And it might be like, cool, I picked the god of, you know, love and life, right? And so I'm the censor who shows up and I'm healing people and I'm smiting evil and that kind of thing. Or you might be the censor of, like, you know, war and storm, and it's like you're much more, you know, here to wreck name and kick ass, right, and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Well, those sound like 4 amazing additions to Draw Steel. And is that 9 is going to be the total in the core at this point, we think, or will there be more down the line?
I think that'll be the total in the core. There will also be more down the line outside of the core.
Perfect.
So yeah, we have a lot of stuff we want to do. We want to do an operator, which is like a mech class. We want to do an alchemist. We want to do a summoner.
God, please do not. I've been waiting for someone to do an alchemist class correctly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree, right? Like there's a lot of good potential there, and we've seen board games do it really well, right?
Yes.
I think the what you call it? My mind is blank. Gloomhaven, right? It has an alchemist class that is great and fun to play. So yeah, we've got ideas.
Well, that's amazing. So then I guess final question before we wrap up here. I know there's a bunch of new stuff, guys, and if you haven't seen it, like, you can subscribe to the Patreon, get access to the playtest. They've got a bunch of stuff, and there's new ancestries. There's titles, there's perks, there's a bunch of other cool things. But just kind of overall, where do you think Draw Steel is in the road to being the final product? Like, how close do you think you guys are in a general sense of getting Draw Steel down to where you really want it to be before it's publishing time?
Yeah, so with the caveat that all things can change and nothing is certain.
Yeah, always.
We are going to have another playtest probably in December that is going to go out to backers, right? Backers are going to get levels 1 to 3 of the game, and patrons on our Patreon are going to get levels 1 to 10, which is the full enchilada of the game. So they're going to get that. It'll probably come towards the end of December, and then probably like mid-January will be the feedback date. And then our hope is that we'll use that feedback to make the final revision to the game. But one never knows. We could get that feedback and be like, we need more testing, right? And we could always use more testing, right? But at a certain point, we need to put the game out. We need to make good on our promise to all of our wonderful backers. So we'll see once we get that stuff back. But it would be great to, by mid-January, be working on the final revision of the game, going into edit and layout, and that's a process that takes months and months and months as we refine the words and look of the game, right? So that would be the final, hopefully. We'll see.
Well, awesome. That's fantastic news for fans of the game like us. James Introcaso, thank you so much for joining us again. And like we said, guys, you can go to drawsteel.com for more details. You can check out their Patreon, their DICE Kickstarter, or their DICE backer kit, I believe, or your funding project. I think the DICE, well, they funded immediately, but is that still open for late pledge, or is that still
That is
ongoing?
a good question. Let's see.
So I got mine
Draw
early,
Steel
and I didn't look back.
You can still pre-order now. There's a pre-order now button, and I'm clicking it, and it does look like you can. You can look at and buy dice still. So
if you want to get those Draw Steel dice, you can go over to drawsteel.com, grab those now. And James, once again, thank you so much for joining us. And like always, guys, for the YouTube stuff, feel free to subscribe. It helps the channel. And if you want more Draw Steel coverage, stay tuned. We'll always be talking Draw Steel until it launches, and then for many, many years after. So thank you all for watching. And until next time, guys, stay safe out there.
Thanks for having me, Pete.